I welcome you for this presentation. In this presentation, we are going to discuss about clustering. In clustering, we are going to discuss a famous clustering algorithm, that is K-means clustering. This is the overview of this presentation, that is introduction to clustering techniques, then clustering as a pre-processing tool, then the quality of clustering, then considerations for cluster analysis, then requirements and challenges in clustering, then partitioning algorithms, K-means clustering algorithm, illustration of K-means clustering algorithm. Then I have given one practice problem and summary of this presentation. So first is, what is cluster and what is the need for cluster analysis? Cluster means it is a collection of objects. From the name itself, you know, it is some collection of objects, and how we are having that collection of data objects means we are just grouping the similar events, that is similar or related to one another within the same group, or we are just grouping the dissimilar or unrelated to the objects in the other groups. So similar objects are grouped into one cluster, that is called as cluster analysis or clustering. So cluster analysis or clustering, or other name is data segmentation also. So this cluster analysis finds similarities between data according to the characteristics found in the data and grouping similar data objects into clusters. Generally, the classification problem, we are calling it as the supervised learning. Why we are calling the classification as supervised learning means there we are classifying the objects based on the class label. Some supervision is there, that is the class label is the supervisor there, but this clustering, there is no supervisor there, that is we are not considering the class label for grouping the objects into a cluster. So this clustering technique is coming under unsupervised learning. That is, here we are not having any predefined classes. So how we are learning? Anyway, here also we are performing some learning, but without the help of the class label, here we are learning. That is learning by some observations versus learning by examples. Here, with respect to learning by examples means that means if we are having some predefined classes, then we are learning through some example. Say for example, if we are having any disease data set, so we are having whether the patient is a normal patient or a diseased patient. So benign as well as malignant, if you are taking network traffic data set, normal as well as attack. Likewise, different classes we are having. So based on the learning examples, we are constructing a model, or we are learning all those data. But here in this cluster analysis, we are not learning based on the class label. With respect to the data available alone, we are finding the similarity between the data, then we are grouping it into the same group. Suppose if it is unrelated means we are matching it to the other group. Likewise only we are performing clustering. So typical applications of this clustering include, it can be used as a standalone tool to get insight into some data distribution, or it can be used as a pre-processing step for other algorithms. In the pre-processing, we have seen clustering is also one of the pre-processing tool. So mainly to cluster the objects, we can group the objects using this clustering technique. So many applications of clustering are there. That is, this clustering is used in biology, that is the taxonomy of living things, that is we are just grouping it into the based on the kingdom, then phylum, class, order, family, genus and species. Then in the information retrieval also for grouping the documents, that is document clustering. Then land use, that is identification of areas similar land use in an earth observation database, that is whether it is a slope area or some plateau area. Likewise, based on the landscape also, we can group the geographical data. Then this can be used in marketing also, help marketers discover distinct groups in their customer bases, and then use this knowledge to develop the target marketing groups. Then in city planning, that is how we are identifying the group of houses according to the house type, that is whether it belongs to apartment or independent house, or based on the value, whether or the geographical location, like whether it is belongs to rural area or urban. So many categories we can categorize any data into different, based on different perceptions. So for that, clustering is used. Then earthquake studies observed earthquake epicenter should be clustered along continent faults. Then climate, understanding earth climate, find patterns of atmosphere and ocean. Then economic science in the market research, many more applications are there. Not only these lists alone used for clustering, many more applications are also there for clustering. So clustering plays a vital role in grouping the similar objects into groups. And one more thing, this clustering can be used as a pre-processing tool also. So in order to find the summarization of the data, that is pre-processing for this clustering may act as a pre-processing tool for regression, that is a linear regression, log linear regression model, multiple regression. In many cases, this clustering can be used for summarization purpose also. So it is used as a pre-processing tool also. Then in principal component analysis, for some classification task also, first we have to group, then we can perform classification. That is also possible. Then in association rule analysis also, this clustering can be used as a pre-processing tool before performing the analysis. So in order to summarize the data, this clustering can be used as a pre-processing tool. Then in order to do compression, for that also clustering acts as a pre-processing tool in image processing and all. Then in order to find out the k nearest neighbors, that is localizing search to one or a small number of clusters. Then in finding out the outliers also, clustering can be used. So in these cases, clustering is used as a pre-processing tool. Next is quality of clustering, that is we are grouping without the supervision of any class labels. We are grouping the data into different clusters. So we need to measure the quality of the clusters, whether it is correct or not. Because when to stop the clustering process, because how many clusters we are going to split, many things are there. So we have to identify the quality of clustering. That is, a good clustering method will produce high quality clusters. So how we are measuring the quality of clustering means based on the high intra-class similarity, that is, it is cohesive within the clusters, and low inter-class similarity. So we always have to keep this in mind. Always a good clustering method will produce high quality clusters with high intra-class similarity as well as low inter-class similarity. Low inter-class similarity means it is distinctive between clusters. Then the quality of the clustering method depends on the similarity measure used by the method, because here mainly the clustering works based on similarity measures, because we are finding out the similarity between data objects, then only we are performing or we are grouping the data objects into different clusters. So here similarity plays a vital role. So which similarity measure we are using in our clustering technique, that is very much important. Then the way we are implementing the clusters, because how we are choosing the cluster centers, many implementation challenges is also available in this clustering. Then its ability to detect all of the hidden patterns. If we are grouping the data, whether the hidden patterns can be identified by using the grouped clusters or not, that also defines the quality of the clustering process. So the dissimilarity or similarity metric, that is similarity is expressed in terms of a distance function, typically a matrix distance of I, j. We have seen many distance measures like Manhattan distance, Euclidean distance, Hellinger distance. Many distance measures are available. Whatever we have studied, L1 norm, L2 norm, the distance measures are there. So whatever we have learned, and many more distance measures are there, those distance measures can also be used in the clustering. Then the definition of distance functions are usually rather different for interval scaled Boolean, categorical, ordinal ratio and vector variable. Suppose if your data is somewhat categorical, then how to find the distance function, whether it is possible to apply the distance function. All these things we have to do. For that we have to perform some pre-processing, then we have to apply the distance function. Then weight should be associated with the different variables based on applications and the data semantics. There is usually a separate quality function that measures the goodness of a cluster. So suppose if you are in your model, you are using the clustering technique, then how we have to measure the quality of the cluster. That is, what is the goodness measure we are using in order to perform or assess the quality or performance of the system. For that, we are having different measures, and it is hard to define similar enough or good enough. That answer is typically highly subjective. So how to measure whether the clusters, whatever we have defined, whether we are categorizing the data into 3 or 4, then 32 8 clusters, 16 clusters, 32 clusters. If you are reading many research papers, in such cases each and every researcher will be giving in different sense. They are grouping the data in different ways. So we have to measure based on that. Also some measure we have to give in order to measure the quality of the clustering process. Because for measuring the quality of the classification, we are having many measures like accuracy, precision, error rate, many things are there. Likewise, for clustering also we are having some measures in order to measure the goodness of the clusters. So we have to use all those measures to measure the quality of the clustering technique. And many cluster analysis techniques are there, and we have to consider many things if you are performing cluster analysis. That is how we are partitioning. So the partitioning criteria, that is single level versus multiple partitioning. Often multi-level hierarchical partitioning is also desirable. Many clustering techniques are available, and we are there. They are partitioning. The divisive method is there, agglomerative, then hierarchical. Many different ways of partitioning the clusters is also available. So partitioning criteria is there, we have to consider. Then separation of clusters, that is exclusive, that is one customer belongs to only one region, versus non-exclusive, one document may belong to more than one class. That is the overlapping classes. Suppose we are having 2 or 3 clusters, sometimes one data belongs to more than one clusters. In such case, how we have to handle those overlapping clusters or data objects. That is, so separation of clusters also plays a vital role. So in one epoch, one data object belongs to one cluster, and in the next epoch it belongs to the next cluster. Likewise, it goes on. So how we have to separate the clusters, the overlapping cases and all, how we have to handle. Next is the similarity measure, that is distance based, mainly Euclidean, then road network vector versus connectivity based, that is density or contiguity. Many similarity measures are there, we have to use accordingly based on our applications. Then clustering space, whether we are considering the full space versus subspaces. That is, we are considering only the low dimensional data, or both the low as well as high dimensional data, or only high dimensional data. Likewise, based on the clustering space also, we have to consider the while analyzing the clustering approach. So the requirements and challenges for this clustering include scalability, that is clustering all the data instead of only on samples. We have to, if we are taking some real-time data, in such cases we are having more data, and we have to cluster it based on all the data available, not based on some samples. Then ability to deal with different types of attributes. If we are getting a mixed attribute type, how we have to handle the clustering approach, that also we need to consider. That is, not all the data set is having only numerical data. It may have categorical, binary, then continuous, many things are available. So how to handle all the categories of data, that is also main thing. Then constraint based clustering, user may give inputs on constraints, use domain knowledge to determine the input parameters. So some constraint is there in the data set, then how to handle it based on the domain knowledge. We have to, suppose we are having the medical data, then we need to know to some percentage about the disease, what disease we are going to cluster is, we need to know, because not fully dependent on the technology itself, that is the technique itself. We have to aware of whether it is correct or not. We are grouping, suppose we are clustering the data of diabetes patient. In such cases, you need to know what is the sugar level. So whether the cluster is correct or not, some basic understanding. So the need of or help of the expert is also needed. So domain knowledge is also needed to cluster it, because in order to manually verify whether it is correct or not, some samples we can manually verify it. Then interpretability and usability, how we are applying the cluster analysis in our model. that is interpretability and usability. Then other such requirements like discovery of clusters with arbitrary shape, then ability to deal with noisy data, then incremental clustering and insensitivity to input order, then high dimensionality. So all these requirements and challenges we need to consider while analyzing any cluster methods. So some of the clustering approaches include many more clustering approaches are there. Each and every day more and more clustering approaches are proposed by the researchers, and here one most popular clustering approach, that is K-means clustering alone, we are discussing elaborately. Other things and all, you just please go through it, because many more variations of clustering techniques are available. So one is partitioning approach, that is construct various partitions, then evaluate them by some criterion. That is, here we are minimizing the sum of square errors. So typical methods include K-means method, then K-medoids method, Clarence. Then another approach is hierarchical approach. So it just create a hierarchical decomposition of the set of data or objects using some criterion. Example for hierarchical approach include Diana, Agnes, Birch, chameleon, all those things. So chameleon means you know what is the characteristic of chameleon. Wherever it is sitting, it just camouflages that object. Just like that, this clusters also camouflages. So based on that category only, they have given the name as a chameleon for one clustering, hierarchical clustering approach. So all those things are different research proposals by different researchers. Then density based approach based on connectivity and density functions. Typical methods include DB scan, it is DB scan. Then optics, DenClue, many things are there, many types of density based approaches are there. Then grid based approach, this grid based approach is based on multi-level granularity structure. Some methods include string, wave cluster and click. So these are some clustering approach. Many more clustering approaches are also there. Let us see. Another thing is model based, that is, a model is hypothesis for each of the clusters and tries to find the best fit of that model to each other. Example for model based is EM, then SOM, cobweb, then frequent pattern based. We have seen the a priori algorithm in order to find the frequent item sets. So based on the frequent patterns also clustering analysis can be performed. That is based on analysis of the frequent patterns. On method is P cluster. Then user guided or constraint based clustering technique, that is here they have considered clustering by the user specified or application specific constraints. The example for that is code, it is obstacles, then constrained clustering. This is some example of user guided or constraint based clustering. Then link based clustering, that is objects are often linked together in various ways. That is massive links can be used to cluster objects. If some social media data is there, then those things we are grouping it as link based clustering only. So similarity rank, then link cluster, these are some examples of this link based clustering. Let us see one partitioning algorithm. That is in the partitioning method, what we are doing is we are just partitioning a database D of n objects into set of k clusters such that the sum of the distances is minimized. So if the sum of the distance is minimum, then it belongs to that particular cluster, where Ci is the centroid or medoid of cluster Ci. So the formula to find out that sum of the square distances is summation I equal to 1 to k sigma p belongs to the cluster Ci, this p minus Ci the whole square. So given k, find a partition of k clusters that optimizes the chosen partitioning criteria. So here the global optimal is the exhaustively we have to enumerate all the partitions. Then heuristic methods we are applying is k means also we can use, then k medoids also we can use. Then k means each cluster is represented by the center of the cluster. So initially we need initial seed, that is initial cluster center. Then we have to, as it goes to different epochs, we have to create new centers of that clusters. Next is k medoids or partition around methods. That is, here each cluster is represented by one of the objects in the cluster. So all these things are variations of different clustering method, but one famous algorithm, that is k means clustering algorithm only today we are going to discuss. Then nowadays this k means clustering algorithm is somewhat modified into k fuzzy means algorithm also. So in order to handle some uncertainty in the data, fuzzy concept is included in the k-means clustering, but today we are going to discuss only the basic k-means clustering algorithm. So k-means clustering algorithm, the steps for this k-means clustering algorithm is, first it selects k number of objects at random from the set of n objects. These k objects are treated as the centroids or center of gravities of k clusters. So first we need to decide how many clusters we are going to have. So based on the number of clusters, what we are doing is we are just finding out k objects. Randomly we are selecting some k objects. Then for each of the remaining objects, it is assigned to one of the closest centroid. Then we are grouping the remaining objects into any one of the chosen k centroids. Thus, it forms a collection of objects assigned to each centroid and is called a cluster. Next, the centroid of each cluster is then updated. How we are updating the centroid means by calculating the mean values of attributes of each object. Then the assignment and update procedure is until it reaches some stopping criteria such as number of iteration, then centroids remain unchanged or no assignment, etc. So when we are stopping means based on the number of iterations. We can fix the threshold. We have to run this algorithm for 10 iterations, or like that we can fix it. Then otherwise, suppose if the centroids are not changing from the previous step to the next step, it is not changing means in that case also we can stop the clustering process. So many things we can have it for the stopping criteria also in this k-means clustering. So this is the algorithmic representation, that is the input. If you are implementing k-means clustering, then it will be helpful. Input D is a data set containing n objects, that k is the number of cluster, then output is a set of k clusters. So the steps are randomly we have to choose k objects from D as the initial cluster centroids. For each of the objects in D, we have to do two things. One is compute distance between the current objects and the k cluster centroids. Then we have to assign the current object to that cluster to which it is closest. Then what we have to do is we have to compute the cluster centers of each cluster, because here in the second step we grouped that is for each and every object how many initial clusters are there. Based on that we found out the distance, then we find out it belongs to which cluster and all. So based on the clusters, say for example, suppose we are having 10 records and 3 records are grouped into cluster 1, 5 records are grouped into cluster 2 and another 3 records are grouped into cluster 3, means we have to find out the mean. First whichever record is grouped into cluster 1, for that we have to find out the mean. Then group 2 we have to find out the mean. Then group 3 we have to find the mean. Likewise only we are finding the cluster centers. Compute the cluster centers of each cluster, thus become the new cluster centroids. Then we have to repeat these steps 2 and 3 until the convergence criterion is satisfied. What is the convergence criterion? Mostly we have to set the threshold. Otherwise, if the centroids are not changing for the further steps, then we have to stop it. So stop. Let us see the illustration of this k-means clustering algorithm. Here we are having 16 objects with the true attributes A1 and A2. So here we are having 16 objects. So this is for your understanding purpose only, it is plotted. Otherwise, if I ask you to work out a problem like this, no need to plot and all. Just you have to work out, that's enough. So here randomly some 3 points are chosen as the initial cluster centers. So whatever the points are chosen as initial cluster centers means this 3.8 is one of the initial cluster center. This 3.8. Then this one 6.2 is another center. Then 7.8 is another center. So here the points we are 3.8. This is 3.8. Then we are having the 6.2. Then 7.8. So these 3 are chosen as an initial cluster center. Here it is randomly chosen. Suppose if you are solving a problem, in such cases it may be given. Otherwise, you have to randomly choose any of the points based on the number of clusters. So here we have chosen 3 clusters, 3 centroids, that is 3 center points. So what is the meaning of k here? K equal to 3, because 3 center points we have chosen. So we are meaning is we are grouping into 3 clusters. 3 clusters we are grouping. That is the meaning. So now we have just plotted the points. If you are working out a problem, no need to plot. You have to randomly choose some cluster points, initial cluster centroids based on the value of k. K also you can fix it. Otherwise, if in the problem it is given means as such you can take. Otherwise, you have to fix it. So now this first step is over. So 3 points we have chosen as the initial cluster points. That is the first step. Then what we are doing is, suppose k equal to 3, here whatever I explained there, that only given here. Suppose k equal to 3, 3 objects are chosen at random, shown as circled in the previous diagram. These 3 centroids are shown below. So initial centroids chosen randomly. These are the 3 centroid points. So now how we have to find out the similarity between this cluster centers? Means we have to find out the Euclidean distance measure, that is L2 norm we are applying here. You know what is the formula to find out the Euclidean distance? That is, suppose we are having 2 points x1 comma y1, 2 points x1 comma y1, and we are having another point x2 comma y2. What is the Euclidean distance? L2 norm is root of x1 minus x2 the whole square plus y1 minus y2 the whole square. This is the formula for L2 norm, that is Euclidean distance is x1 minus x2 the whole square plus y1 minus y2 the whole square. It is not necessary that you have to only consider Euclidean distance. You can consider some other distance measures as well. Okay, let D1, D2 and D3 denote the distance from an object to clusters. These are the centroids, initial centroids or initial cluster centers or initial centroids, object to C1, C2 and C3 respectively. Then we are assignment of each object to the respective centroid is shown in the rightmost column and the clustering so obtained, that is in the next table. Let us see that. So here I am working out for one sample, that is for the first sample I am working out, because we have chosen the centroids as you know that C1 is centroid C1 is 3.8, then 9.9, then C2 is 7.8 and 12.2, then C3 is 6.2 and 18.5. These are the centroids that is given in the previous step. Then what we are doing is we have to find out the distance between this first record and these 3 centroids. So D1 is distance between this record and C1, centroid 1. And this D2 is distance between this record and this centroid C2. And the D3 is distance between this record as well as centroid 3. So we are having 3 distance value. How to compute that? Let us see. For the first case D1, how we are computing is, you know that that is 6.8 minus this is 1 point. You have to consider this as another point. So 6.8 minus 3.8 the whole square plus 12.6 minus 9.9 the whole square. So we are getting as, what is 6.8 minus 3.8 the whole square is 3 square plus 2.7 square. So we are getting it as 9 plus 7.29, which is equivalent to root of 16.29, which is equivalent to 4.03. So only it is given as 4.0. So here D1 is 4.0. Likewise, for the second case, we can consider for a D2, to find out D2, what we are doing is, what do you need to find? This record as well as C2 you have to find. So D2 is root of this 6.8 minus 7.8 the whole square plus 12.6 minus 12.2 the whole square, root of. Then which is equivalent to 6.8 minus 7.8 the whole square is minus 1 the whole square plus this is 0.4 the whole square, which is equivalent to minus 1 the whole square. You know that 1 plus 0.4 the whole square is 0.16, which is equivalent to root of 1.16, which is equivalent to 1.07. So only it's given as 1.1. Here you see it is 1.1. Likewise, you have to find out for D3 also, this record as well as for C3. So for this record as well as C3, the distance obtained is 5.9. So you have to find out the smallest distance. So whichever is getting the smallest distance, D1, D2, D3. Among these three, D1 has the smallest distance. So this record belongs to cluster 2. Likewise, you have to compute for all the records. So for each and every record, here you see 3.0, 7.4, 10.2. So it is small for this D1. So it belongs to first cluster. Then for the third one, you see 3.1, 6.6, 8.5. Here 3.1 is the small. So first cluster. Here you see 10.2, 7.9, 1.4. 1.4 D3 is small, so it belongs to third cluster. So after finding out the distance between each and every record and the cluster centers, we are just grouping it into the different clusters. So totally we are having 3 clusters, and in the first cluster we are having records this one 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 are in cluster 1, then 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 are in cluster 2, then 3 are in cluster 3. So totally 16 records, 9 records are in cluster 1, 4 in C2, then 3 in C3. Let us find out how to find the new centroids. After this calculation, you have to find out the new centroids. How to find it is a K means clustering. So you have to find out the mean of these values. So how, say for example, for this class 3, if you are finding the mean means, see this one, this 3, 3, 3. For this, the corresponding records you have to choose this record 6.0, 6.2 and 7.6. This record you have to take and find out the mean of these 3 records. And if you want to find out the mean of C1, you have to collect the records of all the 1. That is this one, second, this one, all the records, and you have to take the mean of that. Those records divided by 9. For the cluster 2, you have to consider the 4 records, then you have to find out the mean. Let us see the mean, how to compute the mean for this cluster 3. So here you see the record for the cluster 3 are 6.0, 19.9 and 6.2 and 18.5, 7.6 and 17.4. Mean of these records we are finding, that is 6.0 plus 6.2 plus 7.6 is 19.8 divided by 3, because only 3 records in cluster 3. So mean, if you want to find out the mean, you have to divide it by 3. So 19.8 divided by 3 is 6.6. So 6.6. So this y points, it is 55.8 divided by 3 is 18.6. Likewise, for all these cluster 2, cluster 1 also, you have to find out the mean. After finding out the mean, the calculation new centroids of the 3 cluster using the mean of the attribute values of A1 and A2 is shown in the table below. The cluster with the new centroids are shown below. So we have classified it into 3 clusters. So the 3 clusters we have drawn. Then the new centroids, this black is the old centroid, this black represents old centroid and this red represents the new centroids. Then based on this new centroid, again you have to find out the distance between all the records for these things, and you have to group it into different clusters. So they reassign the 16 objects to 3 clusters by determining which centroid is closest to each one. This gives the revised set of clusters shown below. Here you see, note that point P moves from cluster C2 to C1. This one point moves from C2 to C1. So finally the newly obtained centroids after second iteration are given in the table below. This is the newly obtained centroid after the calculation of the centers. Note that the centroid C3 remains unchanged. The C3 remains unchanged where C1 and C2 change a little. If you check the value between this table and the previous table, you may notice with respect to newly obtained cluster centers, 16 points are reassigned again. These are the same clusters as before, hence their centroids also remain unchanged. Considering this as the termination criteria, the K-means algorithm stops here. Hence the final cluster in this slide is same as that of the previous slide. So final cluster center. Finally, we need a final cluster center. This is a type of training. So if you are applying it to the model construction process, you have to use this final cluster centers to group. If you want to classify any unseen data, then using this final cluster center, you can group the data and you find out that whether the data belongs to which group, that you can easily find out using that. So if it is not changing, that is the centroids are not changing from the previous iteration to the next iteration, then we have to stop it. Otherwise, if we are using in real data and all, we have to fix a threshold that iteration 100 iteration goes for 100 iterations, or if it is not changing, both the conditions also, both the termination criteria also you can give for that also. So here both these centroids, previous iterations centroids and this iteration centroids remains the same. So we are considering this as the final centroid, and we are getting the clusters, that is the clusters are also plotted. So I have given one practice problem. Suppose that the data mining task is to cluster points x, y representing location into 3 clusters. Here k is also given, that is 3 clusters. So what you have to do is you have to assign k equal to 3. So you have to find out 3 clusters. The points are A1, all the points are given. The distance function used is Euclidean distance. So whatever we have applied earlier, the same only you have to apply. Suppose initially we assign A1, B1 and C1 as the center of each cluster respectively. Use the K-means algorithm to show only the 3 cluster centers after first round of execution, then the final 3 clusters. So these are the initial cluster centroids. Initial cluster centroids are A1, B1 and C1. So you have to consider these as the initial cluster centroids and you have to perform all the calculation. It's very simple. Whatever the example we have seen earlier, it is similar to that only. So you please work out and send it to me so that I can verify. So in this presentation, we have discussed about the introduction to cluster analysis, then clustering as a pre-processing tool, then the quality of clustering, then considerations and requirements, challenges for the cluster analysis. We have discussed about partitioning algorithms, and one of the partitioning algorithm is K-means clustering algorithm. Then we have seen one illustration of the K-means clustering algorithm, and I have given one problem to practice. Thank you.